Hello and welcome back to Fuck That. If you are new here, do not forget to subscribe so that way you never miss an episode. This week, I am getting into part 2 of my coverage on the Diddy indictment. If you remember from part 1, I talked about Diddy's career, his life, his relationship with Cassie, as well as the lawsuit filed in November of 2023 by his ex-girlfriend, Cassie Ventura. This week, I am going to work through several lawsuits that have been filed against Diddy subsequently, and again, the contents of those civil suits. Something that I noticed with the lawsuits is that they demonstrate a pattern of abuse, manipulation, and violence, not only across Diddy's personal life, but across his professional life as well. The first lawsuit that I'm going to be covering is one that was filed. So I had no idea that this lawsuit existed until after I covered part 1. And this lawsuit was filed in Los Angeles on May 8th of 2017. So before all of this even happened and came to fruition. And this lawsuit was filed by a woman named Cindy Rueda. Cindy worked alongside a chef for Diddy in his Los Angeles home starting sometime in January of 2015. According to the lawsuit, she initially only worked on the weekends from 9 o'clock to midnight, although sometimes this would go on until 2 o'clock in the morning, depending on what events were happening that day. And regardless of how long she worked for, she would be paid a flat rate of $150 a day. The lawsuit is phrased oddly in the next part, but it states that in May of 2015, Diddy asked Cindy to work 6 days a week from 9 a.m. to midnight. And Cindy agreed, and she agreed to the same rate, which was $150 a day. So I thought that this was an exceptionally low rate from 9 to midnight, especially from 9 to 2 or 2:30. So I was curious as to what Diddy's net worth was at the time. I looked it up, and I got his net worth in 2015, and I did list this source in the show notes, but according to that source, he was worth around $700 million at the time. The part that I found a little bit confusing was that it says that she was asked in June of 2015 to work as a chef full-time, which she declined because of the long hours and pay. So what I'm assuming is she was maybe asked in May to work as the assistant chef, perhaps still alongside the chef that I mentioned when I first started talking about the lawsuit. And then this meant that she would be the head chef, and she declined. And I don't blame her because 6 days a week from 9 a.m. to midnight at least for $150 a day is completely unreasonable. So Cindy declined, and then she went back to working her original weekend schedule, which was Saturdays and Sundays from 9 to midnight or 2 o'clock. In September, Diddy offered her the lead chef role in writing as an exempt employee, and Cindy accepted. She worked every day from 9 a.m. to midnight or to 2:30 a.m., depending on what was going on. The problem with this is she was not paid any extra compensation if she worked until 2:30. So if she worked until midnight, she made $150. If she worked until 2 or 2:30, she still made $150. And on top of this, Cindy was required to travel with Diddy whenever he had to go to any events outside of Los Angeles, and she was not paid any extra for this. In October, Cindy complained because she traveled with Diddy for 8 days and did her job, but she didn't receive any additional pay. She spoke to Christina Coram, who at the time of Diddy's indictment, I mentioned in the first part, was his chief of staff. Her name is going to appear multiple times in this episode in different lawsuits, as well as other lawsuits I'll be covering in other parts, because she played a big role in all of this. So Cindy traveled with Diddy. She didn't receive any extra compensation. Cindy traveled again with Diddy in December and complained again to Christina. But in addition, she also complained to his estate director. And she basically said, listen, I'm fine to do these extra duties. I'm okay to travel with him, but I do need some form of extra compensation because I'm about to travel with him for 14 days. She was told to keep track of her hours, which she did when she went away for the 14 days, and she did thereafter. She never received any additional pay up until the time she was fired, which was sometime around May 8th of 2016. Unfortunately, the lack of fair pay wasn't the only bad experience that Cindy had working for Diddy. She was expected to serve food to Diddy and his guests whenever needed. And this included during their freak-offs or sexual escapades or directly after. And there are several times named in the lawsuit where she had to do just that, with Diddy exposed as well as other people exposed, and that obviously made her feel very uncomfortable. To add insult to injury, according to the lawsuit, Diddy would also frequently ask her if she liked his body while he was in the nude. No, Diddy, we don't like your fucking body, please. Leave it to Diddy to push the creep envelope as far as he could. He would also often bother Cindy while she was cooking in the kitchen in a similar fashion, if only she was making bacon in a frying pan. They say never cook bacon naked, if only. The event that eventually led to her being fired in May of 2016 was that a housekeeper who regularly salvaged items from the trash that they discarded in the home ended up taking a watch, which led to Cindy getting accused. This is no different than people that go look in trashes of places like Ulta and Sephora that just throw out shit that are still very much usable. If you don't want your employees to do that, then maybe pay them to the point where they don't feel like they have to do that. Even though, according to the lawsuit, this was the housekeeper that did this, Cindy ended up getting accused. Once this came to fruition and Diddy had accused her of theft, he asked her to sign a waiver of all rights and claims in exchange for him choosing not to report her for theft, therefore choosing to prosecute, and she refused. Due to the employment agreement that Cindy signed when she started working for Diddy, and she got it in writing, it stated that any work-related disputes had to be solved by arbitration. Therefore, when she filed this suit, an LA Superior Court judge sent the case to arbitration. And in February of 2019, the case was listed as resolved. What that entails is unclear, but it's just listed as resolved. What I think is really telling about that case is that filing happened in 2017. Way before any of these other lawsuits that have recently come to light have come to fruition. And it echoes the similar accusations as most of the other lawsuits. And therefore, I think it helps to really establish a pattern of poor and inexcusable and disgusting behavior on Diddy's part. Shortly after the Cassie lawsuit, a woman named Joy Dickerson Neal filed a lawsuit against Diddy in November of 2023, and she filed this under the same New York Adult Survivors Act. In 1991, Joy was a college student studying psychology at Syracuse University. Joy was on break for the holidays when, on January 3rd of 1991, Diddy had invited her out to an early dinner. At the time, this wasn't weird to Joy, for a multitude of reasons. They had several friends in common, and by that point, she had made several appearances in some of his music videos, so this was a really benign and not abnormal request on his behalf. Joy agreed, and the pair ate at Wells Restaurant in Harlem. But in typical Diddy fashion, as you have probably noticed in the Cassie lawsuit, and you'll notice in several other lawsuits, he wanted to keep it going. So he invited Joy to keep her company as he did other shit in the city. This man cannot be alone for one fucking second. Like, he is incapable of finding solace in solitude. At some point during the evening, he had drugged Joy without her knowledge, which caused her to lose her ability to stand or walk on her own. According to the lawsuit, this was done by drugging a blunt that he had given to only her in the car. He brought her to a place that isn't specified in the lawsuit, but what is specified in the lawsuit is that at this location, he sexually assaulted her. What Joy did not know was that on top of being assaulted, Diddy filmed the entire encounter. The way that she found out is really fucked up. A few days later, she was approached by a male friend that told her that he saw her sex tape, along with several other men. She asked how many people saw it, and the friend said, everyone. Joy knew the consequences of telling on Diddy, and so instead of risking that, she opted to try to return back to normal as best as she could. She tried to return to school for some normalcy after the event, but she was subsequently admitted to the hospital for depression and suicidal ideation. What Diddy did to her led to her having to drop out of college. And all because of this man, not only sexually assaulting her, she had to drop out of college and give up her dream. Joy continued to struggle with her mental health and her career thereafter, understandably so. The status of this case at the time of recording is still pending. The next lawsuit that I'm going to be talking about is the Liza Gardner suit, which was filed on December 1st of 2023. I do just want to explain that there was a suit filed as well as an amended suit, but that suit filed on December 1st was filed in New York against Diddy, Aaron Hall, and Aaron Hall is a musician who was in the musical group Guy. It was also filed against MCA Inc., MCA Music Entertainment Group, Geffen Records, John and Jane Doe's 1 through 10, and ABC Corp's 1 through 10. That's going to be something that you're going to see in the next few parts of the series with a lot of the lawsuits, that they're going to be John and Jane Doe's as well as ABC Corp's that are not explicitly named. I am curious if we're ever going to find out those identities. Who knows, but I would be very interested in finding out who is being protected in these lawsuits. Now, this lawsuit was also filed under the Adult Survivors Act. According to the cover sheet, they filed the draft complaint to preserve the statute of limitations under that act, and then they filed the complete complaint on the date that I noted. They just wanted to make sure that they filed it in a timely fashion. In 1990, Liza ended up going to New York City with a really close friend. They ended up there because they were both invited to the city by other friends who were members of a musical group that was signed to MCA Records. It did not name who that group was in the initial lawsuit, but Liza, her friend, and the friends that invited them to New York City that were signed to MCA were all from North Carolina, so that's all how they knew each other. Liza and her friend met Diddy and Aaron Hall at an event hosted by MCA Records at their offices. The lawsuit states that both Diddy and Aaron were very flirtatious and very handsy with both of those ladies throughout the entire evening, and that they both continuously offered them and fed them drinks throughout the evening. They were then invited by Diddy and Aaron to an after party at Aaron's apartment. The lawsuit then states that they were continued to be fed alcoholic drinks, and then it states that, and this is word for word, Liza was coerced into having sex with Diddy. After that happened, she was kind of in shock and trying to process what happened. She eventually began to start to get dressed, and at this point, Aaron entered the room, he pinned her down, and he forcefully assaulted her. After that, the pair left the apartment very quickly. They ended up confiding in each other, and when they did this, they learned that the same thing happened to each of them. So when Liza confided in her friend was like, that happened to me too. They were able to conclude that when Diddy was assaulting Liza, Aaron was assaulting her friend, and vice versa, which is honestly unfathomable, and it's going to get even worse when I talk about the amended lawsuit. A few days after the incident, Diddy ended up going to the place where Liza and her friend were staying in the city. He became very angry when Liza's friend wasn't there because he was worried that she would tell his then-girlfriend what had happened. That's right. Diddy was in a relationship when he assaulted these two girls. It seems to me like he wanted to be able to intimidate both of them into keeping their mouths shut. And when one of them wasn't there, he became annoyed. Because both Liza and her friend weren't there, he took it out on Liza. He assaulted her, and he choked her to the point of her passing out. So the complaint was amended in March of 2024, and it included a lot of bombshell information that wasn't included in the initial complaint. The first really important piece that it included was it specified how old Liza was, and it implied how old her friend was. So it explicitly stated that Liza was 16 years old when this assault occurred. The problem with this is that the age of consent in New York at the time was 17 years of age. Therefore, neither of them could legally consent. It then specifies that the group that invited Liza and her friend was the duo Jodeci. If you remember from part 1, Diddy was the one that was credited for shaping the careers of Mary J. Blige and Jodeci. So to be honest, again, this is all alleged, but this fucking tracks. I want to put it out there that Jodeci is not named as a defendant, and they're not named in any way of partaking in these events at all. I want to make that abundantly clear. But I do want to emphasize the question, did they know what Diddy and his associates were doing? And if so, were they complacent? Again, they're not named as defendants, and they're not accused of anything in the lawsuit other than being the group that invited them to New York. But I can't help but wonder, not only with Jodeci, but everybody that I have seen and we will continue to see being brought up as things start to unfold, how much did they know? If they knew anything, were they complacent? The lawsuit also changed the verbiage of what happened between Liza and Diddy. Initially, it specifically used the word coerced. It then said forced, which I think likely describes what happened way more appropriately. The case was disposed in New York, which could mean a multitude of things like dismissed, what have you. But according to the last filing in June, it states that the suit will be brought forth in New Jersey because apparently Liza and her friend were transported from New York to New Jersey via car, which is where the events occurred in Aaron's apartment in New Jersey. I did register for New Jersey courts, and I did look up the civil suit, and the complaint was in fact brought forth in New Jersey, and it's currently active. So I can't give you a resolution to this case, but I can tell you that it hasn't been dismissed, which is good news. On December 6th of 2023, a Jane Doe filed a complaint against Diddy, Harvey Pierre, also known as Joe Hooker, and he was formerly the president of Bad Boy, as well as an unnamed third assailant, and Daddy's House Recordings, Inc., which I mentioned in part 1. This is just a recording studio under Bad Boy, as well as Bad Boy Entertainment. The lawsuit states that in 2003, when the victim was 17, she met Harvey Pierre and the third unnamed assailant at a lounge in Detroit. They approached her and they flaunted their association to Diddy. Harvey ended up calling Diddy on the phone, and he gave the phone to Jane Doe. And Diddy was on the phone and he said, "You should fly to New York City with Harvey and the third assailant so that I could meet you." Harvey then had Jane Doe go to the bathroom with him, where he subsequently gave her drugs and sexually assaulted her. They then went to an airport to take a private jet to go meet Diddy. This is all in the same day, which is insane. So they take the victim, they go on a private jet to New York. Once they got there, they went to Daddy's house, the recording studio. They then gave her more drugs and alcohol. And I do want to note, this lawsuit's also public. Jane Doe's identity is anonymous, but in the lawsuit, you can see pictures of Jane Doe with Diddy. Her face is blocked because, again, she's anonymous, but you can clearly see photos of her in the studio. You can see the background with a giant PD for P. Diddy. You can clearly tell she's with Diddy and she's in the studio. So they gave her drugs and they gave her alcohol. And then Diddy instructed her to come with him to the bathroom. And it's here that all three men gang raped her. And she's 17 years old. They then threw her on a plane and sent her back to Michigan as if she was subhuman. These people have no regard for anybody else but themselves. And it is truly jarring to read through all of these lawsuits. There was a motion to dismiss this case, and that was filed in May of this year. And I did check, as of September of this year, The last document that I found was from Jane Doe's legal team, which was a rebuttal to the motion to dismiss. So this is still ongoing. I will say that I did see a document before the rebuttal to the motion to dismiss that noted that it might be difficult for Jane Doe to proceed in this suit with anonymity. But again, the last update to that case is the plaintiff's side filed a rebuttal to the motion to dismiss. So it's still ongoing, but we'll see what happens. The last lawsuit that I'm going to cover today, and I'm going to cover the rest of them in the next part, but this one is the most in-depth lawsuit. It's the longest lawsuit that I've read thus far. On February 26th of 2024, music producer Rodney Jones filed a lawsuit against Diddy, his son Justin, a man named Lucien Charles Grange, who is the CEO of Universal Music Group, Ethiopia Habtemariam. She's the CEO of Motown Records, and Motown is the parent company of Love Records, which will make sense in a bit. Christina Coram, sound familiar? His chief of staff? Combs Global Enterprises, Chalice Recording Studios, and obviously Motown Records because of Ethiopia being mentioned, and Universal Music Group because of Lucien being mentioned, as well as Love Records, Combs Enterprises. Rodney Jones is an artist and music producer. And the following that I'm going to talk about are allegations, all according to the lawsuit, like the previous lawsuits that I've talked about in this episode. So Rodney agreed, and he started working for Diddy in September of 2022, and this lasted until about November of 2023. Rodney subsequently ended up producing 9 songs on the album. While Rodney was working on this, he was expected to live with Diddy for several months at a time in various locations, including his home in Miami, Manhattan, Los Angeles, as well as the yacht I've mentioned a few times that he's rented off the coast of the U.S. Virgin Islands. And this meant that he made a lot of sacrifices. He missed birthdays, holidays, and other important familial events. Again, Rodney lived in several of Diddy's residences while this was happening. And while he was living there, he witnessed several things that went beyond his role of producer, of which he had corroborated through various witness statements, recordings of video and audio, as well as images. He required Rodney to constantly film him 24/7, which is not part of his role as a producer. A lot of times, Diddy would take Rodney's phone and film himself. Because of this, thankfully, Rodney had hundreds of hours, according to this lawsuit, of footage of Diddy, his staff, and several guests participating in various illegal activities. The lawsuit states that Rodney has irrefutable evidence of the following: the acquisition, use, and distribution of ecstasy, cocaine, GHB, ketamine, marijuana, and mushrooms. The displaying and distribution of unregistered illegal firearms. If you remember from part 1, I mentioned when I talked about the firearms situation with Cassie that there was a lot that paralleled with the Rodney Jones lawsuit. This is exactly what I'm talking about, and I'll elaborate on it further. It also states that Diddy provided alcoholic beverages that were laced to minors and sex workers unbeknownst to them at his homes in Los Angeles, New York, Miami, as well as the yacht that he rented. That Diddy's chief of staff, Christina Coram, instructed her staff to obtain these drugs for Diddy, knowing what Diddy was going to use these drugs for. The lawsuit does not name this person as a defendant, but it does name them here, and that person is Christian Combs, another one of Diddy's sons, and it accuses him of drugging and sexually assaulting a woman. It then goes on to say that Diddy detailed how he planned to use his relationship with Bishop T.D. Jakes. Before I go on, I want to emphasize T.D. Jakes is not a defendant, and he's not named of any wrongdoing in the lawsuit whatsoever. So please do not think me mentioning him means that he has done anything wrong. It only states that he mentioned Bishop T.D. Jakes, who is a non-denominational Christian pastor and motivational speaker, that Diddy mentioned he was going to use his relationship with him to make his public image look better after Cassie's lawsuit. It then goes on to say that Young Miami's cousin and/or assistant sexually assaulted Rodney. I'm about to name several high-profile people in this lawsuit, and before I want to continue, I do just want to emphasize that this is a civil suit. This is just according to the lawsuit filed by Rodney Jones, but it states that actor Cuba Gooding Jr. sexually harassed and assaulted Rodney. I do want to emphasize that Cuba has made several public statements about this, and he has denied these allegations multiple times. Specifically, in May of 2024, he went on the PBD podcast, and he said that he and Diddy are not really friends, they're just acquaintances, and that there was nothing inappropriate about his encounter with Rodney. The lawsuit then goes on to name a rapper, which is redacted, but identified as a Philadelphia rapper who dated Nicki Minaj on Diddy's yacht, consorting with underage girls and sex workers. It then states that there's an R&B singer in Diddy's home in LA who also consorted with underage girls and sex workers. And this R&B singer was also redacted, but identified as having trouble with law enforcement after assaulting a billionaire. If you Google search those clues, you'll find out who those two people are. So the rapper is Meek Mill, and the R&B singer is Chris Brown. On September 12th of 2022, Diddy held a writers and producers camp at the Chalice Recording Studios in Los Angeles, California. Diddy was in attendance, as well as his son Justin, and another person was identified as G, who was approximately 30 years old and friends with Justin, as well as other musicians. The lawsuit alleges that one night during the camp, Diddy, Justin, and G got into a very heated discussion, which eventually moved out of the studio room and went into the bathroom, which was next to where Rodney was seated, approximately 2 to 3 feet away. Rodney recalled that he had heard gunshots from within the bathroom, and this scared him because he was in pretty close proximity, and if the shots went through the wall, he could get injured. A group of people ended up going to the bathroom and kind of congregating outside to see what happened. Diddy, as well as his son Justin, left the bathroom, but Justin's friend G did not. Rodney was really frustrated because he saw all of these people congregating outside and nobody bothered to go inside to see what was going on. So Rodney went inside and he found Justin's friend G lying on the floor in the fetal position. He was holding his stomach and bleeding from his stomach, but then he had another wound around his hip and the upper leg. According to the lawsuit, Rodney became even more frustrated when nobody tried to help G. So he went to apply pressure to the gunshot wound to his stomach. When he noticed that he had that other wound at the top of his leg or hip, he lifted him to get him seated on the toilet and asked somebody to call an ambulance. Once the ambulance arrived, Rodney helped him to the ambulance, but at this point he noticed that Diddy and Justin had retreated into the studio. The lawsuit further alleges that Diddy gave very clear instructions to let the police know that he had absolutely nothing to do with the shooting. And it also says that he forced Rodney to lie to the police and tell them that G was shot while he was standing outside of the studio in a drive-by shooting. KCAL News and CBS LA reported this incident on September 12th, which is the same day that it happened. They found the man had been shot after stepping outside of the studio. There are several photos that are included in the lawsuit, of which include photos taken from the bathroom, which show clothing and blood on the floor and the toilet. The lawsuit then goes on to identify sexual harassment that Rodney had endured at the hands of Diddy, stating that while he was living with him, he was the victim of constant and unsolicited and unauthorized groping and touching of his anus and genitals by Diddy. The events took place in Diddy's residences that I mentioned in the beginning of the lawsuit. Rodney identifies as Christian and heterosexual. He expressed his discomfort by Diddy's advances to Christina, Diddy's chief of staff, to which she replied with, Sean will be Sean. The lawsuit further states that whenever Diddy would undress and begin to walk around naked, that Christina would leave and be like, all right, I'm out now. And she would leave Rodney to deal with it alone. Rodney believes that Christina was helping Diddy to assault him and was helping him to groom Rodney into accepting a sexual relationship with him. Here's where things start to get even darker. Rodney was a massive fan of producer, DJ, and television personality Stephen Jordan, also known as Stevie J. Stevie J has had a very long relationship with Diddy and Bad Boy Records. Initially, he had worked on their production team, which was known as the Hitmen. And in 1997, he won a Grammy for his work on Diddy's debut album that I mentioned in part 1. He also was one of the producers of the Love album. According to the lawsuit, Diddy used his friendship and relationship with Stevie J, as well as the fact that Rodney looked up to Stevie J, to encourage Rodney to engage in a sexual relationship with Diddy. Rodney alleged that Diddy shared a video of Stevie J having sexual intercourse with a Caucasian male, and that once Diddy sent him that video, he sent him a follow-up text and said, "This is normal practice in the music industry. Look, even Stevie J is doing it." Here's what I can say about that. The lawsuit does include screenshots of that video. It doesn't explicitly show what's going on down there. But here's what it does show. It shows Stevie J very clearly, and he's making a face that people make when they're doing stuff that is alleged here. You can also see a leg going in the opposite direction, and Stevie J is holding that leg tight. In an angle that would imply that exactly what is going on in these allegations is going on. Okay? I'm going to leave it at that. If you want to look up the lawsuit, it's public info. The lawsuit further states that Diddy told Rodney that he has had sexual relationships with the rapper and singer mentioned earlier in the lawsuit, as well as Stevie J. It then states that Diddy promised Rodney that he would win Producer of the Year at the Grammys if he decided to participate sexually. The next section of the lawsuit details assault that allegedly occurred on Thanksgiving of 2022. Rodney was staying at Diddy's Miami home along with Young Miami and her female cousin who was her assistant. Diddy was allegedly intoxicated and offered cocaine to Rodney, which he declined. At some point, he went to the restroom. When he went to the restroom, he was followed into the bathroom by Young Miami's cousin, and at that point, she began to grope him and tried to perform oral sex on him without his consent. He pushed her away, left the restroom, and she followed him. The lawsuit then goes on to state that she began to undress after she followed him out of the bathroom, and she tried to straddle him in front of everybody, Diddy, her cousin, and his staff. The lawsuit goes on to detail the trafficking allegations, which state that Rodney worked with Diddy, and while he did that, he lived in all of the various locations that I mentioned previously. But during that time, throughout all of these locations that he worked, he was forced to solicit sex workers and to perform sexual acts with them per Diddy's direction. Specifically, there is an event that's noted from February 4th of 2023, where Diddy forced Rodney to bring sex workers back to Diddy's Miami home. Rodney believes that night that he was drugged by Diddy because he woke up naked, confused, and dizzy in Diddy's bed with Diddy also naked, along with 2 other sex workers. The lawsuit states that a similar event happened on Thanksgiving night of 2022, which is the same day that those allegations with Young Miami and her cousin took place. The lawsuit further details that Diddy had several recruitment tools in place that he gave to people and that he forced upon Rodney when he was soliciting sex workers. One of the spots was in Miami, and this was a place that Diddy used regularly, and it was a fully nude strip club in the area. Diddy had his associates and disclosed to Rodney that this is what he was going to do and that this was a tactic that he did to let people know that this was happening. He had Rodney enter that strip club wearing a bad boy hat, and this was a signal that Diddy was in town And whoever was wearing that hat was there to solicit sex workers and bring them back to Diddy's home. The lawsuit states that Rodney had no desire at all to recruit or have any relationship with these women, but he was forced into it by Diddy. The way that he did this, in addition to all the other ways that I've already named, was offering him a Grammy, which I mentioned earlier. The lawsuit also claims that Diddy offered Rodney $250,000 to purchase any instruments that he wanted or needed as a producer, ownership of his $20 million property in Miami, access to record label executives, notably the ones I named in the beginning of the lawsuit, Ethiopia and Lucian. But in addition to these bribes, he would implement a similar tactic that's noted in the Cassie lawsuit. In addition to all of these promises, he would also resort to intimidation to coerce him into doing exactly what he wanted. The lawsuit states that Diddy would threaten Rodney with physical harm, specifically, and this is fucking unhinged, threatening to eat his face without being on bath salts. The lawsuit then goes on to detail illicit sex acts with minors and sex workers. Particularly, it discusses an incident that occurred on July 2nd of 2023 at Diddy's home in Los Angeles, where he had a listening party. I feel like listening parties, from what I've learned, are not actually listening parties. They're weird freak-off parties. Allegedly in attendance was Chris Brown, his son Justin, sex workers, and a slew of underage girls. Around 7 o'clock that evening, Diddy made Rodney solicit sex workers. The lawsuit notes that there were at least 5 girls under the age of 16 in attendance to the sex workers. These were not the sex workers that Rodney solicited. These were girls that were in attendance separately, but it's still disgusting nonetheless. Again, the age of consent in California is 18. You cannot consent at 16. The lawsuit further states that Diddy made all of the women drink liquor that was laced with ecstasy. Rodney discovered this and he felt very uncomfortable. He tried to leave, and Diddy forced him to stay by taking his car keys to ensure that he could not leave. He was then forced to drink the liquor that was laced, and he subsequently woke up at 4 a.m. the following morning in bed, naked, with a sex worker feeling dizzy and sick. There are screenshots of video from that day that include Diddy and his son, allegedly with underage females. Their faces are blocked off to maintain their anonymity, but there are screenshots of a party with Diddy and his son hanging out with women that are allegedly underage. The lawsuit then details allegations made against Cuba Gooding Jr., and again, he has publicly denied this, but according to the lawsuit, Rodney believed that Diddy was trying to groom Rodney to pass along to his friends. The incident between Rodney and Cuba occurred on the rented yacht off the coast of the U.S. Virgin Islands. The allegations detail that Cuba touched, groped, and fondled Rodney's legs, upper thighs, the small of his back, and his shoulders. Rodney pulled away and forcibly pushed Cuba away, and it was only then that he stopped. According to the lawsuit, Diddy did not compensate Rodney for the work that he did on the Love album, even though he was listed as a producer on 9 songs from that album. Rodney did try to work with Diddy to secure publishing and royalty rights, but Diddy only offered him $29,000 for his 13 months of work. The lawsuit alleges that Rodney would have settled for $15,000, but Diddy did not want to pay that additional $21,000. Rodney decided after this that he was going to take the issue public and ask Diddy to do the right thing, which then resulted in threats to Rodney from Stevie J, Love Records, and DeForest Taylor. The lawsuit detailed incidences of Diddy threatening and intimidating Rodney even further. In particular, it detailed an occasion where, while standing in Diddy's bedroom, he was forced to watch him show off guns while he bragged about shooting people and getting away with it. The next section of the lawsuit includes the CEOs of Motown and Love Records, as well as Universal Music Group. So allegedly, Rodney had seen Lucian Grange, the CEO of Universal Music Group, in attendance of several parties at Diddy's home in Los Angeles and Miami. It further states that he would disappear with Diddy for hours in Diddy's bedroom. and that he attended several of the Love album listening parties in Los Angeles. These parties were always sponsored by Universal, Motown, and Love Records. Rodney believed that Lucien knew or should have known that Diddy had sex workers as well as underage girls at these parties, and that he was lacing bottles of alcohol that were specifically designated for females. Separate bottles were kept always for staff, other artists, and himself. The lawsuit further states that this has also been detailed by former artists and bodyguards of Diddy. The lawsuit then alleges the same exact allegations I just went through of Lucien with Ethiopia Habtemariam, the CEO of Motown Records. From here on out, I'm just going to read passages directly from the lawsuit word for word because I don't need to summarize it. According to Mr. Jones, during the 13 months he lived and traveled with Mr. Combs, he witnessed Mr. Combs display and distribute guns from his bedroom closet in Miami, Florida, and Los Angeles, California, to questionable individuals dressed in all black. According to Mr. Jones, during the 13 months he lived and traveled with Mr. Combs, he witnessed defendant Coram openly order her assistants to keep Mr. Combs high off gummies and pills. Defendant Coram required all employees from the butler, the chef, to the housekeepers to walk around with a pouch or fanny pack filled with cocaine, GHB, ecstasy, marijuana gummies, 100 to 250 milligrams each, and 2C, which is a pink drug that is a combo of ecstasy and cocaine. It was important to defendant Coram to have Mr. Combs' drug of choice immediately ready when he asks for it. Defendant Coram ordered sex workers and prostitutes for Mr. Combs. Defendant Coram ordered and distributed ecstasy, cocaine, GHB, ketamine, marijuana, and mushrooms to Mr. Combs and his celebrity guests who were present on his rented yacht and in his homes in LA, New York City, and Miami. On multiple occasions, defendant Coram forced Mr. Jones to carry Mr. Combs' drug pouch against his will. Defendant Coram had the following individuals execute the following tasks for the RICO enterprise. Stevie J recruits sex workers and attends and participates in freak-offs. Justin, his son, solicits prostitutes, underage girls, and sex workers. I'm not sure why this lawsuit says prostitutes and sex workers, but again, I'm just reading directly from the lawsuit. Moybon hires sex workers, attends, and participates in freak-offs. It further states Mr. Combs funded and used his affiliation with local gangs and gang leaders who would frequent his homes in LA and Miami to secure the drugs and guns he obtained and distributed out of his homes in LA and Miami. Defendants executed their RICO enterprise with threats of violence. It lists threatening to eat plaintiff's face, displaying and distributing guns in plaintiff's presence, bragging about having law enforcement under control, bragging about murdering people, and bragging about bribing witnesses and jurors in the criminal case concerning the 1999 New York City nightclub shooting with Shine. Defendants executed their RICO enterprise with threats of isolation from the music and entertainment industry, parading powerful music industry executives such as defendants Lucien Charles Grange, Ethiopia Habtemariam, at his parties filled with sex workers, minors, and illegal drugs such as ecstasy, cocaine, GHB, ketamine, marijuana, and mushrooms. Defendants executed their RICO enterprise with threats of non-payment for work completed, fake promises of cash payments amounting to $250,000, Producer of the Year Grammy Awards, and guaranteed access to future projects, and a $20 million home on Star Island in Miami. It then goes on to say that Mr. Combs is allowed to wreak havoc. While living and traveling with Mr. Combs, Mr. Jones discovered that Mr. Combs has hidden cameras in every room of his homes. Mr. Jones believes that Mr. Combs has recordings of defendant Lucien Charles Grange, Ethiopia Habtemariam, as well as other celebrities, music label executives, politicians, and athletes. Upon information and belief, these individuals were recorded without their knowledge and consent, as is the case with the homosexual sex tape of Stevie J that Mr. Combs provided to Mr. Jones. Mr. Combs possesses compromising footage of every person that has attended his freak-off parties and his house parties. It continues to say, upon information and belief, due to this treasure trove of evidence he has in his possession, Mr. Combs believes he is above the law and untouchable. Upon information and belief, Mr. Combs employs Jose Cruz as his IT director. I want to note he's not a defendant. This is the only time he's mentioned in the lawsuit, and I'm reading it verbatim. This writer has spoken to several former employees of Mr. Combs who confirmed that Jose Cruz is the gatekeeper to all of Mr. Combs's recordings. Upon information and belief, Jose Cruz intentionally hides behind the camera and from social media and the internet due to all of the incriminating acts he was required to record for Mr. Combs. On Monday, August 26th of 2024, there was a motion to dismiss that was filed regarding this lawsuit. Interestingly, the same lawyer that represented Jane Doe that I mentioned earlier in the episode is representing Rodney. And I think this is a really good thing because he undoubtedly has become very familiar with the crimes that Diddy and his associates have committed. In September, there was a motion for extension of time, which was granted so that the plaintiff can file an opposition to the motion to dismiss. So this lawsuit is still up in the air. This is where I'm going to leave it for part 2. In part 3, I'm going to continue to go through the lawsuits. And as of the date that I'm recording this, there has been another lawsuit that was filed by another Jane Doe, which I plan on covering. Thank you so much for listening. And if you liked what you heard today, please like, review, subscribe. The website is fthatpod.com. And if you want bonus content as well as this released early, you can find me on Patreon at fthatpod. Otherwise, you can find this video early on YouTube subscriptions.